Welcome all. It's great to see such a beautiful crowd today too. It's with great pleasure that we open the second of the two talks in the Hrant Foundation series, Ancestral Journeys, Reflections on Land and Belonging. Through these conversations, we seek to explore what it means to reimagine the stories passed down from our grandparents, memories of places they once called home, and the fragments that continue to shape identity across generations. For many in the diaspora, returning to ancestral lands is far from a simple act. It carries emotional and historical weight, and yet it may also offer a profound opportunity to honor those who came before us, to walk where they once walked, and to witness what remains. This past Friday, we had the honor of hosting Anahit Nazaryan, who shared her experiences of visiting her grandparents' homelands, most recently alongside her siblings and nieces. She spoke movingly of how these journeys, rooted in the ancestral spaces of Jujun and Injesu, deepened her connection to family, place, and history. She said how her life was enriched after these visits. Today, we are equally honored to welcome Carolyn Rapkievian as our second guest in this series. Carolyn Rapkievian has held leadership positions in museums for over 50 years, including 26 years at the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. She has lectured internationally about the role of museums in understanding history, promoting reconciliation, and the politics of cultural acknowledgement. In addition to collecting and researching her family history, she currently works to document and preserve historic Western Armenian village dances in collaboration with the Hushamadyan project Dance. Check it out, it's beautiful, by the way. Together with her sister, Carolyn retraced the footsteps of their grandfather, Hovaness Okoomian, across a landscape of ancestral memory, from Husenik, which is Ulukent today, a village near the former city of Karpert, now Elazığ, to Kayseri, to Germir, Gesi Kuzey today, to Talas, to Rumdigin, Felahiye today, to Sivas, to Tokat, and Izmir. Today, Carolyn will share with us fragments of family stories from before 1915, the research process when so much has been lost, and we'll explore how identity continues to be rooted in place beyond years of separation. And today we also have with us Elif Shannon Chastain, who is going to guide us and help us during Carolyn's talk. Welcome again. Looking forward.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the Hrant Foundation for hosting my talk and hosting this series. And I was here 10 years ago at a very important conference talking about the role of memory in museums and museums of contentious history. So from that point, I always wanted to come back to Turkey and find out what the places of my grandparents looked like and to walk in their footsteps. What you see on the screen is a compilation of photographs of my grandparents and their families, my great-grandparents. And I live with these photographs every day. They hang in my home as this compilation. And I look into their eyes and I think, I wonder what their life was like. I knew some of them. Some of them would tell me the stories of their youth, and some of them would not. It was too painful. But from the time I think I was 10 years old, I was always sitting with the old ones, and I was either just listening, my cousins would be off playing, and I would ask them. And I started interviewing my grandmother, I think when I was about 12 years old. So I was always collecting these stories. I was interested in these stories. And about 3 years ago, I started pulling together all the research that I'd done, both from taking notes, from audio interviews, from reading books. I read every book that I could. I had a book of historic Armenian maps, and I would study it map by map with a magnifying glass. I had Osman Kokar's books, postcard books, which I adored, and I pored over those pages to see if I could match up the stories that I heard from my grandparents with those places. So when I met my dear friend Elif in 2018, she reminded me that, and we met in Washington, D.C. at an Onik Dingchan concert. And we had coffee, and she reminded me on this trip that I had at that time said, I want to go to Turkey someday. So after the last few years of pulling all of this research together, my sister and I both wanted to go together, and my niece, her daughter, Phoebe Okoomian, came with us, and I was so happy that Elif agreed to be our translator and guide, and she's going to help me with this presentation today. So I'm going to tell you about the family members and about our experiences in all of these places. And just to say, I grew up knowing the stories and the stories of loss and the stories of escape of my grandparents and their families and those who didn't survive. So let's go to the first slide. So this is a photograph of my paternal grandfather, Hovaness Okoomian's family. It was taken in Husinig in front of their home in about 1913. And so it pictures my great-grandparents, and that's Turviz Kalejan and Hovnan Okoomian, and their eldest daughter, Anagil, is seated in the middle with Anagil's daughter. And my great-grandmother has her youngest baby in her lap, Mariam, and my great-grandmother and my great-aunt have babies the same age. So there they are sitting together. My grandfather is not in this photograph. He's pictured to the right because he was sent to America when he was 16 years old. It was getting dangerous for young men at that time, and so they sent him ahead to be safe. He had to hide in some kind of a caravan and go over land, and he made it to the United States. He was hoping to go to school. But when he arrived to stay with his uncle said, no, you have to work. So he was the eldest after Anagil, and then the great aunt with her hand on her hip is Aunt Hanum, and she did make it to the U.S., and then Charlie is in the back row, the boy. Anagil's husband is pictured there with the fez. And the two, and then Sarah is in the white dress on the right, and the two youngest children, Sahag, and then, as I said, the baby, Mariam, on the lap. We've tried with a magnifying glass to see who's in the photograph that Sarah is holding, and we can't really tell. It looks like a more traditional Armenian dress. And I learned from my grandfather's journals that Turviz's mother had recently passed away, so maybe it's her, or maybe it's my great-grandfather's mother, so we're not sure. But anyway, the story of this family is that Anagil and Sarah were captured in the genocide, and they were taken by a Turkish man, and they were kept in Malatya. And Sarah was about 12 years old. She had her doll, but she was raped, and she had a baby. And eventually, and I'm going to read some words of my grandfather, she was able to escape with the help of some American missionaries. But let me read a little bit, because what I want to say is that I had my grandfather's journals. This is a grandfather who died before I was born, and recently my sister and I had them translated, and it was a window that was opened. It was hearing the words of a grandfather that I had never known because he had passed away in the United States. But he wrote, in May of 1915, I received a letter from my family in the homeland. Their letter described the general misery and misfortune. Then I decided all at once to find a way to send some money to my family. And because of the chaotic current state, it's pretty hard to send money. And that's why I'll go to Hartford next Sunday so that I will manage to find a way to send some money. And 3 days later, he takes a 2-day trip, round trip, to go to Hartford to send $22.50, which was a lot of money in those days. And we still have the receipt for that money that he gave to the missionaries to try to get to his family. We're pretty sure it never got there. January 1st, 1916, so now it's been 9 months. Today's the new year, sitting heartbroken in my room in a completely foreign corner of this foreign country. I'm away from my parents, my homeland. It's already been a year that I did not hear anything from my country, and I do not know if they're alive or not. When all the Armenian-populated areas in Turkey are flooded with the blood of innocent people, I have nothing but hope that 1916 will be a peaceful year for all those who suffered. And then he writes, today I received a letter which informed me about my sister Anna Gil, her child, and my younger sister, and this is Sarah I mentioned, who were forced to leave their homes and are now staying in a Turk's house in a village near Malatya, and that my younger sister was forced to marry the Turk. And then in 1919, so this is now 4 years after he's heard from his family, on August 14th, we received a letter from my sister Anna Gil from our country. We didn't receive any letters for a year. Her letter was confirming the bad news of the murder of our parents and also of my brother Sahag, that's the littlest boy in the picture, and my sister Mariam, the baby. And we learned from Sarah later that they were beheaded in front of her. My sister, and then the next year, so now another year goes on, my sisters Anna Gil and Sarah and my uncle's son, and also Anna Gil's daughter Regina, arrived here in New York, America. They arrived at our house on July 26th. And one thing I want to share from Sarah's memory is that what she most remembered about her home was the family sitting around the tonnier, and they had such happy times there. They shared conversation and stories. It was a very loving place. So let's go to the next slide. So I was very fortunate to have Martin Duranian's book about the Armenians of Husinig. And there are 2 Okoomian families mentioned in that book, and I think it's 7 or 9 Kalajian families. Kalajian is my great-grandmother's family. And on this map, I mean, I pored over this map. The Okoomians are not shown, so it's not the whole village, but the Kalajians are shown. So let's go to the next slide. So we have this photograph of Husinig from Hushamadian. And if we look at this, we can try to figure out how that map corresponded to this old photograph. So one of the stops of our journey was to find the village of where Husinig was. Yeah, go ahead, sorry. And we got very close. We walked around with the help of a local guide who explained where we should go. We tried to get as close as possible, but because of the terrain, it's very difficult to traverse that area. Originally, the houses were terraced, so it was possible to go to this area. But we took a picture, and next slide, and we created a little memorial in a nice tree here, and in another location as well. We brought my father's ashes, and I had made some little tiles of the babies who were killed and my great-grandparents who were killed, and we put them in this tree. So let's see, we'll keep going here. So the next stop was Harpert itself, and this is the oldest photograph that we have of family members. These are my great-great-grandparents, and my great-grandfather is a boy. And this is on my maternal side now, so unrelated to the Okoomians, Migurdich Matarosian and his family. This is my great-grandmother there, Uskui, and my great-grandfather. He was killed in the Hamidian massacres, but my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother managed to make it to the United States. And next slide. And we're also very fortunate that we have some surviving objects. I inherited her wedding dress, Iskui's wedding dress. I did not know this existed until my great-aunt was elderly, and she knew I worked in a museum, and I had worked with textiles at one point, and she said, I want Carolyn to have this dress. It must have been in the attic. It was so dirty, and you can see that it needs some conservation work. But I had learned how to take care of some things, and I decided, well, the best thing for this is to wash it a little bit. Someday maybe I'll restore it further, but really to get off the grime. So very carefully, I put it in a bathtub of cold water because I had known this method in my museum work, and I gently washed out some of the grime, and then I hung it on a line, not in the sun, and let it dry. The exterior is a brocade, but the interior is cotton, and it was very wrinkled. And I also knew from my work that I could very carefully take a cool iron and maybe try to get out some of the wrinkles. The dress would relax a little bit. So with this iron, I was working on this dress, and I got up to the armpits, and all of a sudden, the whole room filled with the smell of garlic and sweat. And my great-great-grandmother was in the room with me at that moment. So that's a treasured object. So we were in Harpert, and go to the next slide. And we saw this church, Surp Garabed Church. We didn't know exactly where my great-grandfather Migurdich Matarosian lived, but next slide. I had this document. It was a life insurance policy that he took out in the United States, and it says where he's from. Now, family lore was that he was from the city of Harpert, which is in the separate from where Eliza is today. And it says, if you can read this, it says he's from Washa, Turkey. And it says he's from Harpul. So this is an American clerk trying to interpret, what an Armenian man with an accent is saying. Well, we know there's no W in the Armenian language, so what could this mean? I sent a picture of this document to all of my Armenian historian friends and genealogy friends. I posted it online. Can anybody figure this out? Looking at the maps, and then I enlisted Elif into looking at these the maps, and we're trying to look at maybe old villages that might sound like that. And then we sent Osman a message, and he said, it's Asha. Of course. So this is this is the.
When you pronounce it like that, when you say Washa, like Washa Harput. So he was probably trying to say, I'm from Washa Harput, Asha Harput. And of course the American clerk was saying, Asha Harput, okay, Hasha should be Washa. So that's how he wrote it down. And then also Harput, like Harput doesn't mean anything, doesn't sound like anything. So just, should be something related to pool. So let's put it heart pool. So, of course, it was obvious to figure out what heart pool represents, but for Washa, for me, when I did not know the area, Carolyn had one old map. There was one town sounded like, had not W, but V, called Vijan. So I thought maybe that's it. But then we ended up messaging Osman Bey, Osman Köker, and there's an Asha Harput, where actually Armenian quarter, where Surp Garabet Church is actually the center of the area. And it means upper or lower? It means lower. Yeah.
So to all my Armenian friends who are searching out their, documents, we have to ask our Turkish friends. Okay, and fortunately, the Surp Garabet was in this part.
Yeah, actually, I can go back to.
Yeah. Thank you. So next, on the right is my maternal grandfather, Ludwig Seropet Nikashin. I knew my grandfather very well. He was a beloved grandfather. And I always asked him, tell me about the old country. And he'd say, no, I'm in America now. It's too painful. He wouldn't tell me. So my grandmother did tell me some stories, but I didn't know as much as I wanted to. And when my mother died, I discovered that my mother's cousin had recorded my grandfather. And he was asking my grandfather shortly before he died, where did you live? Where did your parents live? A whole long tape. Unfortunately, this tape is in very, very bad condition, and I haven't had the opportunity to use a sound engineer to enhance the sound. But for the past 2 winters, I was trying to transcribe this tape. And I'm going to play a little bit for you, not quite yet, because actually there's a couple more slides. Let me just show that cross, too. So this cross, we have a few survivor objects from the Nikashin family. When my grandfather was playing in Gesarya, Kayseri, he found this in a cave or a cavern somewhere. It's actually from the Crusades. And so this was a treasured object brought to the United States. And then another picture is a silk shawl that was his mother's, my great-grandmother. I guess we can go to that picture before we show the rest of it. So she was Gulasar Tatlian, and we'll tell a little bit more about her in a minute. And then I also have this photograph, and I never got to ask my grandfather because we found it long after he died. And I've shown it to many, many scholars, and they haven't seen this photograph before. But presumably, this was near where my grandfather lived. And so we've been looking at this, and Osman has a hunch about where it is, so we'll talk about that later. But let's go to the next historic picture. So another thing that I did was look at the old pictures and try to figure out where things were, where that picture was in relation to that. And then to this tape. Let me tell you very quickly, yes, I think we're okay on time, about this tape. So I found this tape right after my mother died, and I brought it home with me, and my hands are shaking as I'm going to play this tape. And I start listening to it, and my grandfather's talking about all this stuff that I never heard and I never knew before, and I had wanted to know. But it's very hard to hear. And I think I'll save part of the story for later, but let's play a little bit. if we can. I want to demonstrate how difficult the sound is. No, grandfather. And he's saying where they lived. And you'll hear a lot of sound in the background. We hope it's going to work.
Of any of our Nakashian properties in Kayseri.
Vineyard is at Al Yazı.
The vineyard is at Al Yazı.
White Plains.
Al Yazı?
Yes.
The vineyard is at Al Yazı.
White Plains.
White Plains.
Okay. That's enough. So we didn't play the whole thing, but going back to my slides. Next slide. So on this very poor quality tape, I learned that the house, the Nakashian house, was next to Sup Atsvadzin Mair. And so I think, well, where is this? And I look it up, and oh my goodness, it still exists as a library. So on Google Maps, I go on Street View, and this is in the USA. And I'm walking around his neighborhood, and I thought, wow, I can actually go there. I don't know which side of the church he lived on, but this is a place. This is a place where I can probably walk in his footsteps. Another part of the tape that is very difficult to hear, he says that when he was 2 years old, he went to live with his mother's parents because his mother had another baby and there were a lot of children and she needed help taking care. And his grandmother's house, which he remembered, was at Cheshma Basha. And I'm looking at, trying to figure out what that means and where it is, and I can't find a specific place, but let's put the next slide on. But Elif, do you mind telling that part of the story about where that was? Where the reference was?
Cheshma Başı. Yeah, after long looking up and research, we found out that in Arshak Albayuajian's book, it gives like records of the names of the neighborhoods. Actually, it does mention a district, a place, like neighborhood called Cheshme Başı, where there are two churches next to it, and on the left side there is Aramian school, girls' school in Kayseri. So, and there is a cheshme, like fountain, and then we ended up thinking that should be it, because it's just like nowadays in Kayseri known as Armenian district, so it's around the area. So that's how we found it.
Yeah, so I guess my point is that even for all these years of research, there were some unanswered questions that just magically got answered on this trip. So I think that was meant to be. Another part of the tape that we had difficulty hearing was where the vineyard was. Yeah, so you just heard a little bit of that, and I was trying to look up, my grandfather says it was Albiaza or something like that. It was very deteriorated part of the tape, and I said, okay, and then he says, it means White Plains. So using Google Translate, I look up White Plains, and I'm trying to hear what my uncle is saying, and Albiaza, that's all I could come up with. So then I'm asking all my Turkish and Armenian friends, do you know of any place called Albiaza? And I'm going to put Elif back on. So let me say, so I'm asking her to listen to this tape of my grandfather. She listens to it in the hotel room here over and over and over again. The night before, we're going to try to find, we don't even know where it is, we just know it's somewhere on the mountainside. The vineyard was on the mountainside.
So that was really exciting and fun part for me, because as a historian, I just going into a source, trying to figure out and unlock the mystery is just like the best part of being a historian. So yeah, we listened to it over and over and over and again, and I said, wait a minute, okay, I hear yazı, but it can't be. You first said it's al beyazı, al beyazı. So it can't be al is red, and your grandfather says it's white plains. Eventually, and then I figured out, no, it's not al yazı or al beyazı. It's actually ak yazı, because ak is white, and it's used in that time, and also he's pronouncing as ah yazı. So if you could hear it clearly, it says ah yazı, ah yazı. It means white plain. And then when you just the word, you guess the word and you Google Map. You guess the word and try it find in the Google Map. It's just really the whole detective work. And eventually I put Akyazı in the Google Map, and it appeared. And it ended up being, actually, in the time, it was a vineyard. That area, just basically on the skirts of Erciyes Mountain. So the whole area is a vineyard where Armenians have their vineyards and do the, wineries. So that was a treasure finding for Carolyn. We just hugged each other, jumping up and down in the room. So the next day, we were there.
Yeah, so next slide. So, we knew it was on the mountainside somewhere, but then we had a destination to go to. So next slide. So we were driving around. This is a little grapevine here. And we found a park, and we left a little memorial up there to my great-grandfather, Serope. I don't have a photograph of him. I don't know what he looked like. But I know that he was killed somehow in the genocide. As I said, his wife, my great-grandmother, Gulasar, I know she came to the U.S. On this tape, my grandfather's talking, and he says she was in the genocide. So she had some hardship. I don't know what it was, but she, and I know that her sister also lost her husband and her child. They made it to Aleppo, Egypt. Sorry, they made it to Egypt. And eventually they made it to the U.S. But the other memorial that I left, so let's go to the next slide. So there were 4 brothers in the family, and all of them had this portrait of their sister. This is Dikranui. Dikranui was the second eldest. She was a beloved sister, and all of the brothers made it to the U.S., but when they would walk by this portrait of her, they would tear up. And I always asked, what happened to Dikranui? And finally, my grandmother, when I was a teenager, so this would have been her sister-in-law, not her own sister, but she knew something from my grandfather. She said, well, she was raped by a Turkish soldier, and she got venereal disease, and she died. So that was the story I lived with for decades. So I'm listening to this tape that my hands are shaking when I got it, and my uncle says, what happened to Dikranui? He says to my grandfather, and my grandmother jumps in, so that my grandfather doesn't talk. And she says, oh, so sad. She died of a embolism in the brain. Like, what? Okay, that doesn't make any sense. She was only 23 years old. Okay, so then I get to the end of the tape, and it breaks. I said, oh my goodness, I can't hear the rest of it. So, as you know, I was working at the Smithsonian. I brought it to the Smithsonian on a Friday. It was a day when people weren't too busy. I went to the special lab and I said, please, could you help me with this tape? I'd stayed up for hours till 3 in the morning watching YouTube videos, how to try to fix a tape, and I didn't want to make a mistake. They said, okay, here, we'll do it for you. So they put it on a new cassette, but I had to wait till I got home from work that day to play it. So I turned the tape over, and so now my grandmother's out of the room. And so let me just stop the story and go to another picture of a photograph that was found. I had never seen this photograph. I'm looking at this photograph, and if you go back, you can see that this is the same exact portrait. The portrait has been colorized, and the man has been erased. So who is this man? Anyway, my uncle asked my grandfather again, what happened to Dikranui? And my grandfather said, her husband, and I stopped the tape. I said, what? Her husband? Nobody ever said she had a husband. What was this story about? I don't even think my mother knew this. So I keep listening. Her husband was in charge of the labor battalions. So I think we all know what that means. He was a Turkish soldier in charge of taking the Armenian men, and they were either killed or they were worked to death. So there's some missing part of this story. I'm going to assume it was not a love marriage. I'm going to assume that it was a forced marriage. And maybe the story of her death, you know, both stories are true that we heard. But I leave here with a few unanswered questions, and one of them is, someday will I ever find some kind of a civil record that has some kind of a record of this marriage or of her? So that's a family mystery. So next slide. So as part of a little memorial, we left some things for Dikranui and my great-grandfather Seropet, and this happens to be, we discovered after we did this little memorial, an apricot tree seedling. And apricots are very special to us as Armenians, and this will come back at the end of the presentation. I'll tell you a little more about that. So on to the next place. My great-grandfather, Reuben Madarian, was from Tokat. And I don't know too much about his life where he started out. He did make it to the US. I just know that he was born in Tokat. So without much information about him, and also learning that Armenians and Turkish people and other people all live together in Tokat, we went to Tokat and we walked through the city and just imagined and enjoyed ourselves there, honestly, looking at the old houses and the view. And so the next slide is a picture of him on the left and his wife, my great-grandmother, Menamshe, which means violet, Jajayan. And Menamshe was an orphan, and family records say that she was born in Rumdig. And I had some written things as a youth that said that, and so for many, many years, I asked Armenian friends, where is Rumdig? And I looked on all the old maps, I couldn't find Rumdig. But she was a beloved grandmother of my father. Next slide, she was a seamstress. She made beautiful Armenian laces. And finally, about a year ago, an Armenian genealogy friend said, well, you know, there was an Armenian village, Rumdigin. And so through a little bit of research, I found out that the Turkish name for that is Falahiye. Am I pronouncing it right? So I looked again on Google Maps and found this village, found pictures of it, and then learned that there was, let's go to the next slide, there was one fountain in the village that still exists, and this is our visit to the fountain where my great-grandmother probably got water. This is my niece Phoebe at the fountain. So next slide. We didn't really spend much time in the actual town because again, we didn't know exactly where she was born, but we took a stroll down one of the lanes. It's a very agricultural town, and it was a very pleasant trip to just imagine that she was born there. The next thing we know of her life is that she taught boys English in a school that was run by the missionaries. So let's go to the next slide. I found that there is, and this was in Talas. I don't know how she got to Talas and exactly when, but this is a missionary school that still stands. It's currently a college. We arrived unannounced, and Elif, with her sweet ways, convinced the director to give us a tour. We got to go inside and see some of the classrooms. I think this is where my great-grandmother would have taught English because it was a boys' school for the missionaries. But I still want to ask the question, because I'm always incredibly thorough in my research. Did the missionaries have another school for boys, maybe younger boys, where English was taught, maybe down in the city itself? This one is up on the hill. But it was very, very meaningful to go there and think of her as a young woman. So we know then that she ended up in Sivas. So we stopped in Sivas. And the story in Sivas is that her husband, Reuben, and she had had a child. The child died, and my great-grandfather wanted to bury this child. Well, let me first say, he was trying to go home to this child when she was sick. She was calling his name. She was 2 years old. And he couldn't get there in time, and he was heartbroken. So they buried her there, and then things were getting bad for the family, for Armenian men in particular. They had another baby, and Menemshe convinced Reuben to go to the United States, and she would follow him. He would get enough money to bring her. So she had to wait 4 years before he earned enough money. Meanwhile, she was in Sivas. I believe she was being taken care of by the missionaries at this point, because when she was to come, she wasn't allowed to leave. And so the Mr. and Mrs. English, they were missionaries, pretended that her baby was their baby, and that she was their baby's nursemaid, and they were returning to the US. So I have the names of these missionaries, and I've been combing through all of the missionary records that are around, mostly in the US, to see if I can find any letters of the Englishes that describe their time in Sivas and Sepastia, but I haven't found them yet. So maybe they wrote about bringing this young woman and her baby. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a picture of my grandmother in the middle and my great-grandparents. I told you about Migrdich. He's on the left. He was the one that lived in Washa, or Asha, Harpert. And on the right is my great-grandmother, Khosruhi Arzumanyan, and her maiden name was Balyan. And Khosruhi was born in Kayseri, and then the family moved to Germir. Her mother was Altun Balyan, who was the sister of Durtad Balyan, and he's a famous bishop. And I'm aided a little bit in that there are lots of histories written about Durtad Balyan and his family. So now I know the his father's name, so my great-great-grandmother's father's name. I learned where they might have been born. But anyway, let's play a little bit of the tape, actually. So I had recorded my grandmother. This is a recording maybe I made when I was about 12 years old, and she's talking about where her mother lived.
Around the age of 3, 2.5, 3, they moved to Germit. Germit is right outside of Kayseri.
Kayseri is a city?
Kayseri is Kayseri.
Is that a city?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's also called Kayseri.
Yeah.
And this is where they had a very beautiful home. Very, very lovely. Her mother's brother was Archbishop Tokat Balyan. Her mother's maiden name was Balyan. But after she was married, her name was Erzincan. Now, her father's name was Stephen. And Stephen had a brother, Havak, and he was a priest also in the Armenian church in Germit. The Armenian church in Germit was called Sup Stepanos, St. Stephen's. And Tokat Episcopos was the archbishop, and his brother-in-law was a priest. Yeah, that I say, yes.
So I have this long oral history from my grandmother, and one of the really nice things about my grandmother is that she recalled from her mother really personal stories of a very famous person. So Tokat Balyan, I think he's very revered. Her brothers used to play pranks on him. I guess they lived in the same house, and he lived with them. So one time, as she says on this tape, the boys hid a rooster in his closet in the bedroom, and so then the rooster starts crowing in the morning. Or another time, they stole his vestments, and one boy stood on the shoulder of the others, and they put them on, and then they appear outside his window, and so they were pranksters. But anyway, we wanted to find both Surp Garabedvank, and let's go to that picture, where Tokat Balyan created a museum and a library and a school. This had been an ancient monastery. This is what it had looked like. It, again, had the help of some lovely local people who showed us around. But I show the next few slides just to show that sometimes when you take this trip, you end up in unexpected places and not the place you meant to go. So this is actually Efkere. So we're going looking for St. Stepanos Church, but it's the wrong one. So next slide. So we're peering through this keyhole. We found the church, and we're wishing we could go inside. Next slide. And all of a sudden, the man with the key appears, and sweet-talking Eliv talks him into opening the door. So let's go to the next one. So we get to see inside, and this is really wonderful. And then he and his wife offered us some wonderful hospitality in the place that they lived next door, which was actually the priest's house. They knew that it was the priest's house. And we had some tea and juice in their garden. It was lovely. And then he said, well, let me show you another part of the house that we're using. He insisted. So we're going to show you what the priest's house at St. Stepanos looks like right now. We were quite amazed. This is the rock and roll parlor of this gentleman. Anyway, but the next day, we realized our mistake, and we found the Germid Saint Stepanos. And my sister, who sang a beautiful Armenian hymn in this church. So that was a very beautiful part of the story. So Khosrow-Fuhi lived in Germir until she was about in her 20s. And then the family moved to Izmir. So let's go to Izmir. And we don't know exactly where they lived in Izmir. I had researched where the Armenian quarter was. Elif knew where the marketplace was. So we took a little boat ride. We saw where the Armenian quarter was approximately. We walked around it. And next slide, we walked in the marketplace that was probably the marketplace where she and her family were. And just to tell the story of her coming to the United States. So Migrdich had already come. And he decided he would go back to the United States. He was from Harpert. He was a laborer from Harpert. He went back and he got as far as Izmir. And people said, well, things are very difficult in the country, but we know a nice Armenian girl you should marry. And why don't you go introduce yourself to her? So he goes up to her gate, and she answers, and he asks for a glass of water, and she brings him one, and then he asks her to marry him right away. So she says, well, I have to think about it. She had several suitors. And so she says, come back tomorrow, I'll decide. So she goes into a cave, and she lights a candle, 3 candles for each of the suitors she's considering. And the one that stays burning the longest is going to be the husband that she marries. So that turned out to be Migrdich. So he comes out back the next day, and she says, okay, I'll marry you. You go ahead. I want to take a vacation first. So she goes on her own vacation to the French Riviera, and then she's writing to him saying, I'm coming to Boston, meet me at Ellis Island in New York City. This is the ship, this is the day it arrives. And so she gets the ship, they get to Ellis Island, and he's not there. And she doesn't, she doesn't speak any English, but with the address, and she has a trunk full of wool from their ranch, and her feather bed, apparently. She gets a carriage all the way to Boston. She finds his address, and she knocks on the door, and she's a little upset because he wasn't there. And he is surprised to see her, and she speaks Turkish, and he speaks Armenian, and so they're yelling at each other. Well, it turned out that he's living with his uncle, and her family had disowned her because they were very unhappy that she was marrying this peasant. Well, he was not happy that that Migrdich was going to marry this society girl, and so he had been burning her letters. So anyway, eventually, she said, I'm not going to sleep with you until we get married in the Armenian church by an Armenian priest. He said, well, there's no Armenian church here. But eventually, I guess they got together and had my grandmother. So I just want to show, next slide. We're really here, my sister and I, and maybe my niece too. I don't want to speak for you, but for our parents, who I know would have loved to make this journey. So they are both with us in spirit. We are doing this for ourselves, but we're also doing this for them. And finally, one more. I just want to thank Elif, who opened every single door and every single alleyway for us and really made this possible. So one more thing I just want to say is that this trip has been so important because I think it's important for us Armenians to bear witness to what has happened. And I believe that the land has a memory of us. And I also believe that we have a genetic memory of the land. And a friend wrote to me while I was here and asked me to do something. And so I wrote back, I'll do it when I get, and I was about to write, I'll do it when I get home. And I thought, well, wait a minute, this is home. So am I home now? Or, well, wait, I'm home. So I wrote, I'll do it when I get back to Maine. So that's how I feel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. It was a very precious, very special presentation. I had all these questions ready, but you covered everything. So I don't have anything to ask you, but I have to say that I was very much influenced by the way you carefully cleaned up your grandmother's wedding dress.
Great-grandmother's.
Great-grandmother's dress. And I think, I mean, you started interviewing and researching when you were only 13, I think, your family's
Or
story.
10, maybe.
10, maybe. And I very much likened your process to how you cleaned this beautiful dress patiently, carefully, and all of a sudden unexpected smells came out. And I think this journey was also very much like that, filled with joy and maybe also loss, but stories, missteps, as you said, and beautiful encounters. And I can imagine how precious it was also with, I mean, doing this trip with your sister and with your beautiful niece, Phoebe, and we have a surprise.
Yes,
right?
we do have a surprise. Yes. So during this journey, my niece, Phoebe Okoomian, appeared in our room one morning. Elif and I were sharing a room, and she said, I've written a song. I don't have the music yet, but it can be a poem for now, and I'd like to ask her to read it.
So there's no music yet, so I'm just going to read it like a poem, but you have to imagine that it is a song, because it reads like a song. And my working title is Zirani. Which means? Oh, which means apricot. The vineyard sleeps under the veil of the past. The dust settles on the lies that last. The flowers still bloom, but the mountains a tomb, the spectral voices overcast. So I return you to the apricot tree. I leave myself under the apricot tree, and I take a piece with me, so I have a piece of home. But I cannot return. Everything is ash and bone. I feel the heartbeat of the land estranged, the villages gone or rearranged. The echoes remain like something arcane. They call to me through time and change. So I return you to the apricot tree. I leave myself under the apricot tree, and I take a piece with me, so I have a piece of home, but I cannot return. Everything is ash and bone. The school where she taught, the cave where he hid, the ancient fountain flowing still, the shepherd's boy, the fairy tale girl, the candle that saved her by chance or by fate. So I return you to the apricot tree. I leave myself under the apricot tree, and I take a piece with me, so I have a piece of home. But I cannot return, so instead I'll roam. Hairs in the breeze, I cast a spell for peace. Lilith of the night, sow your seeds of insight. An olive branch, a new ancient dance. The future is still being written. It's all up to us. The future is being written. It's up to us now. The future is still being written. It's all up to us. The future is being written. It's up to us now.
Thank you so much. You reminded again how remembering poetically sometimes is the only way to respond to the absences, to the losses, to the fragmented stories. Thank you both very much. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Elif, also for your guidance.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add how important it was. We did leave pieces of our hair in all of these places. I brought my son's hair with me. I got his permission first, so the next generation is part of this home as well. So thank you all for listening today. Did you want to ask if anybody has questions?
Yes, maybe some questions might come from the audience. Just looking.
Thank you so much, Carolyn. This was really brilliant, very touching, and of course the poem also like a song. I think that really gave us the sense of how amazing the whole endeavor was for all of you. Recently, I participated in a tour with Aras Arafian from the Gomidas Institute. And in fact, we traveled most of the places that you showed here, not the Carpet tour, but he's doing that right now as we speak. Yes. He's on his last day. And we went from one village in Kayseri to all the way south to Silifke. And we were able to see some of the places that you showed us in the pictures and hear some of the stories of the Armenians who came with us from all over, from the United States, from Ireland, from France, and so on. It was really unbelievable. The church that you showed, I think it was in Efkere, right?
I showed the Efkere, but also...
Yeah, that one we couldn't go into, we weren't allowed, but we were able to take a peek from the top because the ceiling is basically it's a vacuum. So that was unbelievable. Yeah. But and we sang along and tried to remember the past in a poetic way, if possible. I was wondering if you would be interested in actually doing this on one of the tours, because more are going to follow, and it would be amazing.
Well, thank you. I want to also add, maybe Elif wants to say something. In our misadventures, before we were let inside, we actually, with some other local, the people you saw in the picture, showed us looking at it from above. So we scrambled up and did that first, but then we went inside.
Effort. This was so a moment. This was a moment really, really precious for Carolyn and Janice, because it was like finding a treasure. So they really wanted to go inside and see it, but those three family did not know how to get there. So the guy actually offered us to go all around and try to climb at the top of the dome, so we can get a view. So we did that. Actually, Carolyn did that. Actually, the guy just first climbed up and he pulled her. Actually, she had a shoulder pain for about a week from that, because he pulled her like a sack of potato. Anyway, so we were anxious and she was taking photo, like shaking with excitement. That was the whole effort. It was like, 85 degrees outside. Pretty hot. Anyway, so we finished that. But then for doing the ritual, leaving some memories there, we wanted to come back all our own. So that's what happened. So this person who turned the priest's house into a discotheque, so he was going back and forth at first. And when we went there for a second time, he just peeked from the next house and said, "Hello, abla." Merhaba abla. I said, "Hi." And then he came back and said, "Are you guys Armenian?" And I said, "Yeah, we are. I mean, my friends are. They're trying to take pictures." And he just grabbed a big key out of his pocket. "I have the key." And and Janice and Carolyn was trying to take that whole picture from the hall, trying to see inside, thinking that that was the church they were looking for. And then just like, "I have the key. You see, I am the priest of the church right now." This is literally what he told us. "I am the priest now." We were like, "Oh, great, thank you, we're so hopeful." And then he opened the door to us. And that's how we were able to go inside and take all the pictures. He showed us carving on the walls and everything. That was the moment. Then we were invited to his house, and he insisted to show us to his party place. So, yeah.
But also... Yeah. So, you mentioned something because I have always known about the, is it Armin? No. Armin Aroyan took Armenians for many years on trips. And I know that Ara Sarafian is taking groups now. And I went to a Zoom that he did. But from the very beginning, I wanted to go very specific places that were very specific to my family, and that was going to take a long time, I knew. And while I would like to see everything Armenian, and I would like to see things that mean something to other people, I wanted to be able not only to go where the places where my family very specifically was, but also to leave time and flexibility for spontaneity. What if somebody, found something that I didn't know about? Well, we could change our plans. We could take a detour. And I feel like you can't do that on some of the organized trips. But this last 3 weeks has set me to thinking, and Elif and I have had such an amazing time together. She's an ace at opening every door that is closed, and multilingual, and historian, and I love people and love doing the research, and so maybe we're going to do our own tours someday. So if anybody's listening to this, let us know. We'll have a fun time, and I do want to come back. So my husband doesn't know that yet, because I told him this was a once-in-a-lifetime trip, but maybe it's a little, maybe not. And I think my sister wants to say something or ask a question. Thank you. This is Janice Okoomian.
Hi, so I'm Janice, I'm Carolyn's sister, and I'm Phoebe's mother. And Carolyn did virtually all the research for this trip with Elif, and I did virtually none of it. But I wanted to say a couple of things about my own experience, and that is that I have always thought that I would do this trip. Since I was very young, I felt like I needed to go to the place where I originated, and I didn't know when, and my parents sort of never got organized to go. And Carolyn and I talked about this in a theoretical way for a number of years, and then this ended up being the time. And when I was preparing to come, I was thinking a lot about the fact that we now have an understanding of epigenetics and the way in which trauma can be passed on in our DNA, and that we inherit things like anxiety disorders and hives and allergies and things like that that may come from the experiences of our ancestors. And so one of the things that I wanted to do, and I was the one who transported some of the ashes of both of our parents, which were extremely dusty when you tried to toss them into the wind. Nevertheless, I also thought I wanted to leave something more than my hair, and so I am the very geeky kind of person who kept her wisdom teeth when they were removed 4 decades ago. And they were in a little box in a closet. And I decided, well, these have my DNA in them, and I want them to be there. Like, I want not just my parents' DNA, but I want mine to be in this land that over generations gave birth to me. So in our little places where we made the altars and we put ashes, and Carolyn put the medallions that she made, and we put hair and so forth, I also have strewn some teeth here in Turkey. And to me, I think I feel like it's been quite surreal to be doing this, because it's like at the same time it's wonderful and it's a homecoming, and then it's also very dislocating and distancing when I encounter people who know nothing about. We don't know where the Armenians went. Oh yeah, they used to live here, but then they had to go. They left, and now we're digging up to see if we can find all their treasures, because they were all rich. And the kinds of misinformation which Americans are sadly now experiencing in our nation. It functions as a kind of impediment to the experience, and yet it's also part of the experience. And so I found myself, as we were in places that had been completely like built over, or like for instance in Harpert, there's this kind of lovely antique Harpert exhibit town that they've restored and built, and there's a museum with musical instruments, but the Armenian quarter of Harpert is just ruins on the hillside, completely unmarked. And so as I was looking at some of these places, I was really trying to imagine as though I was in a movie, and you know how the movie dissolves, like you're in the present and then it dissolves into the ancient past. And that sort of helped me feel like I could imagine being with my great-grandmothers, great-grandfathers, great-aunts and uncles in some of those places, and imagine what it was like for them to live, and also to be with them in that way. Okay, Melis.
I'll try to say this without crying. So what you said reminded me of the famous Hrant Dink speech. So where he talks about how you know what I'm talking about.
The water finds its crack. Yes. Shall I continue?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll pick up from there. And thank you. This was so incredibly touching, Carolyn, Janice, Phoebe, and Elif. So picking up on Phoebe's amazing poem and what you were saying about your wisdom teeth, what would be a response coming out of a poetic, wise, loving response to your journey? What more would you like to see, or what more would you like to be a part of in the future, involving us, all of us? What can we together with the treasure that you have shared with us today?
Well, I would like to be welcomed back and dance with my friends here.
this isn't necessarily for here specifically, but I want to try to actually like produce the song. I have no idea how to do that. I have a cousin who makes music. Maybe she can help me, but that's as far forward as I've thought.
And I guess I would also like to sing together, you know. So Carolyn mentioned that I sing, and although we were not brought up in Armenian church, and I'm not doctrinally committed to Armenian theology, I do find that some of the sacred music speaks to me. So the two pieces I sang in different places were the Hayrmer, which is the Lord's Prayer in Armenian, and Havun Havun, which is the 11th century piece that I also have sung in the old monasteries, 4th century monastery in Armenia, in the Republic of Armenia. So I've been singing that around in the various churches, and it feels, you know, in the same way, and actually Aylin and I were talking earlier that, you know, making art together is the response, and it creates new connection, it keeps memory living, it creates new memory, and it's ultimately what connects human beings. So I would like to do more of that, including perhaps some collaborative poetry as we did 10 years ago when I was here last.
The Ranting Memorial Workshop.
Yes, yes, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And of course, Aylin is, with her expressive arts expertise, would be the person. Great.
And also to add that I continued to be very inspired by Hrant Dink's work. It is so appropriate for me to be here. I do a lot of, as you heard in my intro, cultural appreciation work, conciliation, reconciliation work, working for so many years in the United States with indigenous people, and continuing to do that work. I want that to happen here. So that is my hope too.
Hello. I also would like to thank you for sharing your journey and your emotions. One important thing for me is that you are all women. At one point, I think, oh, they are all women. They are guides, are women. Denise is a woman. So I wonder about how the men in your family reacted to your journey. Is there a way? Is there a difference in the way that the women relate to their past, they explore their past, or they deal with traumas, and the men, the way the men do it? What's your thoughts about this?
Well, I think my sister and niece may have a different idea, but I do know men who have come and men who want to come. In my own family situation, it was just simply logistics that prevented this. So I personally don't see a gender difference, but I think my sister and niece may want to comment, and Elif can say something if you have something to say too.
Yeah, so on our side, the only man who's actually Armenian and would have this connection would be my brother, and he could not come also for logistical reasons. He's working, but this is not a gender difference so much as I think a sort of general temperament difference. But my brother is an incredibly sensitive soul, and I think that he I hope he doesn't mind me saying this, he was the kind of kid who, if somebody got hurt, he had to go into the other room because he couldn't hear about it or think about it because he was so overwhelmed with empathy for them. And so I think that he might have found this to be a little too overwhelming at this current stage in his life. And I think maybe later in his life, I think he might be more, when he gets older, he's very young. So, I mean, he's an adult, but he's a young adult. So maybe later on in his life, he might be able to.
And I'll just say, my husband is Jewish, and part of what makes our marriage work is our liberal religiousness on both sides, but also the fact that we both come from families that experienced genocide. And he would have come, but I told him he had to stay home and take care of our cats on this trip. And I just felt like it was going to maybe be so too unwieldy to have too many people. So it wasn't sort of deliberately an only trip. But in some ways, I also want to hear if Elif has thoughts about that, because, you know, I think at one point you said it's easier for women to travel around than for men.
I actually meant, like, when Carolyn, many times you mentioned about me, like, as if I have a magical key to open all the doors, so like doors opened when I just started the conversation. I think maybe because of the patriarchal, you know, societies, women are more vulnerable, and also like in local, like small rural towns, local environments, I mean, men here just actually be more careful when they're talking to women, and women can just like kindly interact easier. So I kind of felt that when I'm choosing the right attitude and right words, and they will be kind to me because I'm a vulnerable, not really strong woman. They need to protect me in this like no land, like Akyazı. It was just, it was plain, full of like old vineyards, and there was no one around pretty much when we were walking around those places. And even in the church, this young person with a key opened the door to us, but he was more of a, I'm protecting these women kind of attitude. So this is my confession. I thought this was gonna work, you know, in the places if I just be kind enough. Like this is, this not threatening. Yeah, this was not part of our journey, but we wanted to end up and see Göbekli Tepe since we were close. So we also visited Urfa. Like we got lost trying to find our hotel. We were in a dead end, and there was a road, but it was blocked by 5 police officers, and the 2 guys were drinking tea next to it. I just picked out of the, you know.
Other roads were one way.
Yeah, it was such a chaos.
Yeah.
And I just like opened the window, kindly said, "Affedersiniz, excuse me, we need help. We're trying to find." 4 of the police officers surrounded our car and tried to be helpful. And then we ended up getting open. They opened the gate, like blocked the gate for us. Seriously, I'm telling you. And they asked us to turn left, which was one way. And I said, wrong way and one-way street. And I said, we can't turn left. I allow you. You can go. Literally, I'm not joking. This is what they told us. And also those 2 old guys, when police were helping us, they also stand up. You'll go this way and you'll go that way. I've been like, ended up like really trying to have a, you know, compete with the conversation. So this was several other examples. This is always what we face. I kind of feel like this is my conversation because we were women. They felt like, oh, these women are vulnerable. We need to be, you know, show our hospitality and be protective. That's what the influence I got. If there was like a big man with us, maybe they wouldn't care. Also, that young guy with the key, second time, showed the key and opened to us because we were alone. Those other neighbors, helped us, the family, he was gone. He was not there. And when he saw us alone, he approached to us and he said, I have the key. And he told us, I saw you with this man, but I didn't want to interfere for some reason. And then, yeah, these are the examples I face. I think this was the benefit of being all women in the journey, yeah.
It also attracted my attention that the transference of stories in your family came from both sides, both grandmothers and grandfathers, especially a key, maybe the solution of a story came from the grandfather, right? So in my experience in here as an Istanbulite Armenian, for example, and amongst my Armenian friends, usually it's the women who carry the stories. But in your case, it was grandfathers, grandmothers alike who brought the stories to you. It's beautiful. Thank you.
There's another question. Oh, two more questions.
First, thank you very much for sharing your story. What did you do with your anger or resentment, or did you ever have it? I met a lot of Armenians, for example, in the US, who are rightfully, very hesitant to come to Turkey. Whenever I invite them to come and to see it for themselves, for example, they say that we don't want to come until the state recognizes the genocide, or it is a very difficult thing to make this trip, I know, and really appreciate what you did. I'm sure it wasn't easy, but how did you deal if you ever had that kind of, negative feeling?
Well, I think that's a very important question. Thank you very much for asking that. For me personally, I think it's that I've been processing this for a long, long time. There are several documentaries that came out over the last 15 years, and I watched all of them. And so I watched Armenian Americans going to places, and they would eventually get into conversations with local residents who didn't believe the history, and they were very indignant, and that was painful. And so I think because I knew those stories, and I know Taner Acham. I presented at a couple of conferences he organized, and so I know the denial stories. So I think that I don't take that out on anybody personally. And also one of the things, when I was in the United States, I did a study of how Americans are taught about American Indians in the schools. And I know Aisha Gul was doing the same here. She and I talked about this. So I also know that people don't know the history. So I think it's through my professional work of understanding any people who don't know the history, and they don't want to believe the truth, because I remember, I think, Hrant Dink saying, Turkish people can't believe that their ancestors would do such a thing. That's impossible. So it's a matter of not knowing the history, but also, I'm a good person. I'm not like this. So I personally don't hold it against anybody, and I think I didn't come with anger, and I knew that we might encounter people that weren't aware of the history, but I didn't want to go into that conversation because I knew it would be there, but that wasn't what this trip was for me. I wanted very much sort of going under the radar, and I can be very culturally reconciliation active, but this trip I separated from that. I guess I have the courage to share a very personal story that happened to me when I was in graduate school. So maybe this was part of the processing. So I grew up with these horrific stories, you know, of my grandfather's family, both grandfathers' families, and the history. And my grandparents were not angry people either. Maybe that's part of it, you know. And my parents were not angry people. They were very generous people. They always said, you know, there were Turkish people who helped Armenians. So, but yet, you know, we had I heard my grandparents explaining in a museum when they saw something that was Armenian and it wasn't attributed to an Armenian in the United States. And they would be explaining the history. So this is my childhood. And then I was in graduate school and I was very far away from home. So I could not go home for a holiday. And I was invited to my mentor's house she was an elderly lady in Texas, to her house for the holiday. And she said, "Oh, Carolyn, you're going to have so much in common with my son's girlfriend. She's Turkish." And I confess, I had never met a Turkish person, and I was nervous. And I'm thinking, this isn't rational. I know she can't hurt me, but what am I going to say when I meet her? I'm a lot older now, but this was like my first experience, so I'm just sharing this. So my heart was beating when I met her, and my mentor said, "Oh, and this is Carolyn, and she's Armenian." And this young woman said, "Oh, Armenians, aren't those the people who used to live in the hills?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." So that, I think, insulated me, inoculated me, and I also believe that if you come with anger, you get anger. If you come with generosity, you receive generosity. Am I? I have something very different to say. Oh gosh.
So I think I got the anger in our family, and I've been angry about many things since I was a child, and I'm now a professor of feminist studies. And I tell my students, we should all be angry at all of the injustices that there are. And so my anger is not just about what happened to the Armenians and the denial. I'm angry about what's going on for women around the world. I'm angry about the erasure of the history of slavery in America, which is our current president is doing. I have a resting level of rage under me all the time. But I think that when I was getting ready to go on this trip and I was telling people, you know, I'm going to see where my family was from in Eastern Turkey, they were like, "Oh, that's going to be such a lovely trip." And I was like, well, maybe not. And it's really more of a pilgrimage, and there's a darkness about this that is, you know, this is not a vacation, and this is not a kind of easy, like, I'm Italian, I'm going to go back to Sicily, you know, and eat pasta. So, although we did eat quite a bit of kufta. Okay, so, but I think that I was very nervous about whether my anger was going to overwhelm me. And I think in general that it didn't, because we were all insulated from people. And my sister and my daughter and I don't speak Turkish, so we were really insulated from most of what might have been said. And also, as Carolyn says, like, that wasn't the point. That wasn't what we were here for. So but I think I got grumpy at my companions on 1 or 2 occasions, and I wondered if that was my resting anger kind of seeping out a little bit. But I'll also offer, as a feminist scholar, what feminist scholars have said about anger, and that is that, first of all, women are not supposed to have it and are punished if they have it, certainly in the US. I don't actually know if that's true in Turkey. But that your anger, your righteous anger, is a resource. It's not something you dump on people. You don't want to get into those arguments about, you know, that we were trying not to get into. But it is a form of energy that can spur you to activism or creative projects or educating people in ways that are, you know, going to be productive. So if you have anger and you try to just ignore it or stuff it, it's going to come out, and it's going to come out in usually very problematic and unproductive, counterproductive ways. So it's better, I think, to kind of own it and then not let it drive you, but you recognize that it is there, and also what's there is your joy at seeing the golden wheat fields, you know, and the pomegranate trees and the olive trees and eating the apricots and all of the other joys. So those things have to, if they can coexist with each other, then it's not one dominating the other and acting itself out through you in unproductive ways.
Yeah, sorry. Sort of started a little adding on to that with, I think that I processed some of my anger through art when I was in college. This song that I read today was the most mild of the songs that I've written in my lifetime about my feelings about this. And so I think that I processed a lot of that when I was younger, but also I think that being here, it's very sort of an overwhelming experience, and I think that for me personally that manifested more as grief than as anger on this particular trip. I think that I was, the things that made me angry made me more sad than angry, because when I thought about the situations where people just don't know here what happened, that doesn't make me angry, it makes me sad that people don't know. So I think it's sort of the same feelings, but they're manifesting a little bit differently. So that's my answer. And I process it through my music and my art and my dancing. So that's my answer. Did you have a question?
I had a question. First and foremost, thank you for sharing this heart-touching journey. It was truly awakening for us. Like, it was actually very heart-touching. It was very emotional. I have 2 questions. First, as you talked about emotional, like, you know, like genetical trauma that we carry forward. So in your work, how do you approach this integrational trauma linked into displacement or genocide? Like, what role does land play in healing? Like the way that you guys visited these places, how it helped you guys, or I don't know if it did or did not, but how does it help in healing? And secondly, I really wanted to ask, like, for people like us, in your view, how can younger generation reconnect with a sense of belonging when they are disconnected from their ancestral land and language?
Well, I don't know that this helped with my healing. It helped with my connection. And I'll go back to what I said before, that I think it helped the land too. So that's all. Is that it? Oh, one, yes. You want to ask? No, maybe last question, yeah. Right? Okay.
Maybe last question, yes?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for making this personal journey open to, accessible to the public. And as you navigate through the geographical and historical memories of not just of any collective, but of your family, how do you want us as an audience to remember this talk, either as a collective or an individual?
Well, I would like you to think of it as your own journey just beginning. Or maybe you've been on this journey and you're going to continue, whatever that means to you. So,
thank you very much, all. I'm leaving with very tender and angry emotions, transformed, yes. Healthy anger, yes, healthy anger emotions. Thank you very much. I hope you are all leaving with also tender memories from this talk. It was a very unique and precious talk. Thank you to all of you. Thank you so much for coming.